Hello, and welcome to another episode of TacoBytes, your Daily Bite of Degen, episode number 571. We are coming to you from somewhere, nowhere, Rhode Island? Maybe. We are at Degen After Dark, enjoying the nice fireside retreat that we are on. And so we are really sort of enjoying this day. I hope that you guys are as well. A lot has been going on as everyone's sort of getting ready for tomorrow's Cancun update. And what is Cancun? It is the updates of all updates, supposedly, for proto-dank sharding and blobs. What is this proto-dank sharding that I am talking of? What does that mean for you? It is a lot to take in. So, as always, why don't we just go to the sources? Let's figure it out ourselves. And let's talk about it. I personally have read, I think, like 4 papers on it so far, to understand fully what it is and what it means for others. But just because I have doesn't mean you have. And you're just like, well, does it mean less gas fees? Possibly. That is the answer. So what I wanted to do, why don't we go directly to the man, the myth, the legend himself within Twitter. No, not me. Not me at all. But let's go to Vitalik, who does not like daylight saving times, obviously. That blobs will cost 0.001 ETH. Today, 30 Gwei per gas, 0.06. And if you think this, I think Polymarket guess that blobs will be is over optimistic, so you can use the market to hedge. Okay, so he covers a lot of it into reverse engineering of pieces, and so I wanted to find where let's see here. There was something free listening on all channels. He literally came up with what is this? Highly networked computers and our privacy net, very underexposed privacy improvements, some fancy ZK, but also some plain boring collect and track less stuff, please. So he did put out a really good paper. It must not have been recently, of where he went through and sort of went through everything on the Cancun update. And so let's just ask Twitter. So before we deep dive into it, but what it really actually helps out is on the aspect of settlements and rollups, or rollups, however you wish to call them, from layer 2s to batch things together into what are now called blobs. So instead of 1,000 transactions, there's a blob. 3 blobs per block right now is what the official countdown piece is. So Data wallet, CoinDesk. Here's the Cancun Denob, Binance Academy. Ethereum Foundation put something out, but it looks. Watcher Guru usually puts out good stuff. Here we go. Consensus. So part 1, EIP 5656 and 6780. They'll be implemented by the Cancun Denob now known as the Dencan. Hard fork on Ethereum. In this post, we dive into 2 Cancun specific execution layer upgrades. While each Ethereum upgrade executed via hard fork inevitably touches many lanes within Ethereum's roadmap, they're typically weighted in a specific direction. For example, the Bellatrix upgrade was primarily designed to transition Ethereum's consensus from proof of work to proof of stake, while the recent Shanghai Capella upgrade mainly targeted enabling validator withdrawals from the beacon chain. With the upcoming Cancun Denab upgrade, there's a clear focus on improving Ethereum scalability through the creation of data blobs, a new transaction type intended to scale data availability for layer 2 rollups. In addition to blob creation, there are also important housekeeping upgrades, 2 of which we will break down in this post. Later in this series, we will detail the more formational EIPs that will structurally change Ethereum. So as we roll back real quick, we're going to just sort of talk what they were talking about. Everyone remembers the Shanghai as well as Bellatrix. So Bellatrix was when Ethereum transitioned. The hard fork was from proof of work to proof of stake. Shanghai was when the upgrade happened that allowed validators to withdraw their staked ETH from beacon chain. So remember when people were staking for ETH 2.0, it wasn't until they were able to unstake state for that upgrade that they were able to unstake it. So a lot of interesting pieces were put into this. So Ethereum, a tale of 2 layers. The Ethereum network is divided into 2 main layers, the execution layer and the consensus layer. The execution layer, prior to the Bellatrix upgrade, often described as the merge, Ethereum's consensus layer and execution layer operated independent of one another. To learn more about the merge and its place in Ethereum's roadmap, visit Consensus Information Hub for the merge. In our post-merge world, there are 2 layers run parallel to one another. Execution layer. This part of the Ethereum that handles the execution of smart contract logic and is where transactions are processed and broadcast to the rest of the network. The execution layer is also responsible for maintaining the state of the Ethereum network and executing the Ethereum virtual machine code. In short, it's where all the computational work happens. An execution layer, hard fork are named after the cities that have previously hosted DevCon: Berlin, London, Shanghai, Cancun, Prague, Osaka, and Bogota. Soon, Istanbul. Consensus layer. This layer is responsible for the agreement on the state of the network among all nodes. It ensures that all transactions and smart contracts are validated and agreed upon via proof of stake. Each consensus layer upgrade is given the name of a star within the names chosen in alphabetical order based on the first letter. Altair, Bellatrix, Capella, Denab, Electra, and they put fun known for F. So how and when do upgrades to Ethereum's layer occurs? So just so we can backtrack so you guys know, we're Dencun, Denab, and Cancun. So for execution layer, it's wherever DevCon happens. And consensus layer upgrades come after stars. So since there's a consensus and execution layer, you would think Candon, but they went with Dencun. Oh my gosh, I'm getting tongue-tied speaking about this. Rolando, new upgrade on lower fees. Oh well, bullish on the whole space. Actually, it will. The idea is that it will because that is the idea of it, that it will lower fees because transactions will be batched together from layer 2s. So as of right now, if we look at, we can go look at Etherscan. It's a great place. You can sort of see gas right now is Gwei's at 45. We can see who the gas guzzlers are. We see that Arbitrum, Scroll are all sort of being big gas guzzlers. Linea, um, blast deposits, obviously Cow Protocol, Zen Crypto still up there. Anonymous One, who knows what that is? I'm now really interested about what Anonymous One is. 1 hour, 3 hours, 4 tokens, Wrapped ETH, Matic, DAI. What is this? Contract creations. Anonymous One. I really want to know what you are. I'm sorry, guys. I went down a rabbit hole. You should not allow me to go from contract, create file from pointers. So file creation pieces, token transfers. 3 Bonobo trip. Bonobo. Create contract with call of action value way salt call require create. Interesting. It looks like they might have had an issue. Is that what I'm seeing here? Or is this going to be all right? Let's see here. 3 hours ago. View all internal creations. Oh, so this has been a while. Okay. Execution, contract creation. So almost, it's like a deployer, I think, of some kind. That's what it looks like. So yeah, create to type. It is creating. I don't know what it is creating. 1 hour ago, smart contract creation. So let's see what the smart contract 2. I want to see. So this is a smart contract that. All right. It has not been verified yet. Stop. Block hash. Copy. Push 26. Oh, yeah. This is the. I'm sorry, guys. We totally went down a complete rabbit hole here. But. All right. Perfect. All right. Well, we will. No, that's. I don't know why we. All right. So let's see. Push 14. Stops. Timestamps. Interesting. So yeah, we fell down this rabbit hole. But what we were trying to show was, in fact, who the gas guzzlers are: Uniswap, Universal Router, Tether, Exchange Proxy, MetaMask Swap Router, Arbitrum. So as you can see, there's different meme coin, stake meme coin token. Okay. A lot of people are staking their meme coin. Good for them. So yeah. Badoop, badoop. From meme. All right. So yeah. But what this is going to do is give use rollups to make cheaper and faster. No, so a different rollup from L2. Yeah, no. So actually, it updates tomorrow. Tomorrow is the update day. It's less than 12 hours away. Use rollup to make it cheaper and faster. So no, so a different rollup from L2 to ETH. No, not roll up from L2 to ETH, but settlement. So we'll go through this, and so you guys can understand it, Roland, and I can get a better explanation, so I can explain it better to others, because I know internally what it does, because you know that fire and electricity, and fuel make combustion. Sometimes it's hard to explain the inner dynamics of an engine to someone, but those things, three things make the engine go. I said electricity, so no, air, electricity, or spark and fuel create combustion. So we're going through this so we can better explain it to others, and we love what Consensus puts out, because they put some really cool stuff. Yes, settlement. That's what you were thinking. Yeah. So roll up, down, settlement. So the layer is responsible for agreement on the state. But I wanted to just take a second to explain where the name Degen came from. So if it's just a consensus layer upgrade, then it will be just named after a star. If it is an execution layer only, it will be named after where DevCon has been. If it is a execution and consensus, then it will be the two names combined. How and when do upgrades to Ethereum's layer occur? Each Ethereum layer undergoes separate upgrades, but the client teams for each layer synchronize the timing of each Ethereum hard fork. Therefore, while the forthcoming Cancun and Denab upgrades are technically distinct, they are implemented simultaneously. As a result, the portmanteau Degen is sometimes used to refer to this combined upgrade. These upgrades do not follow a strict timeline or cadence due to Ethereum's decentralized nature and plethora of client teams. Nevertheless, recent hard forks have shipped roughly every 8 to 12 months. Before going live on mainnet, each hard fork is battle tested through a series of test nets. Similarly, Cancun and Denab will be subjected to a local test net before activation on the Ethereum mainnet. The testing roadmap is likely to follow the pipeline shown below, although given this timeline is not absolute, with the Cancun and Denab hard fork expected to go live on Ethernet sometimes in January. So obviously January got pushed back to March. What is the date on this article? October 12th, 2023. Okay, well, here. Let's see. We already know it went through Groli, Holsky, and Sepolia. This post will detail the two Cancun-specific execution layer upgrades, EIP 6780 and EIP 5656. For readers unfamiliar with Ethereum jargon, EIP stands for Ethereum Improvement Proposal. Each specific upgrade to Ethereum typically starts out as an EIP and undergoes review discussion by the Ethereum community before it is implemented. You can see EIPs considered for inclusion in the fork on the Ethereum Cat Herders Degen page. This is actually a really good page. This is actually where we read our first paper on this upgrade. EIP 6780, self-destruct only in the same transaction. EIP 6780 is designed to disempower the self-destruct, spelt as such, opcode, while causing minimal disruption to smart contracts currently utilizing it. This change is partially motivated by the upcoming implementation of Verkle trees, which will make the pre-EIP 6780 version self-destruct operation impossible. If a contract references self-destruct in the creation contract, this EIP will not have an impact. Funds will still be sent to the target, the code and storage are deleted, and the nonce will be reset to 0. However, after EIP 6780, if is implemented, if the contract does reference self-destruct in the same transaction as creation, only the funds are sent while the code, storage, and nonce are unaffected. To put it simply, existing usage of self-destruct should be unaffected, while future references to the opcode will be stripped of their potential negative capabilities. A brief history of self-destruct. Self-destruct is an old opcode in the EVM. It was designed to be used by proactive contract creators to clean up and remove unneeded or depreciated code from Ethereum state. However, most Ethereum developers consider self-destruct to have failed in this goal. The many dangers and unintended consequences of calling this opcode have led to developers to stray away from it at best and incorrectly use it at worst. The semi-deterministic nature of self-destruct made it difficult for developers to use and often led to incomplete states where data was not fully deleted. This was partially due to the difficulty in estimating the time needed for storage to be removed, as the gas cost was the same irrespective of the amount of data queried for deletion. Benefits of EIP 6780. On the surface, the benefits of this EIP are clear and represent necessary house cleaning of the EVM opcodes that is only possible in hindsight. Proponents of this EIP argue the benefits far outweigh the negatives and refer to Ethereum's roadmap and future Verkle tree usage, wherein the negative consequences of incorrectly used self-destruct calls have the potential for far worse consequences. That said, depreciating and bickering specific opcodes always has the potential to come with unintended consequences. Here, the problem has to do with the inability to account for the thousands of Ethereum developers in the myriad ways which they may be utilizing self-destruct. In cases where a smart contract's logic relies on the self-destruct opcode, removing it may affect the contract's operation and result in potentially unsafe execution. The disempowering rather than the complete removal of the self-destruct opcode is an attempt at compromise between these conflicting views. In an ideal world post-6780, there would be few new implementations of self-destruct in Ethereum smart contracts, and no existing smart contracts calling the self-destruct opcode would be affected. For a more comprehensive introduction of both sides of the debate around the removal, we encourage reading Self-Destruct. Memory copying instruction. Where EIP 6070 is a reactive upgrade focused on removing a harmful and regrettable opcode, EIP 5656 is a proactive implementation of a new opcode that promises greater efficiency in how data may be moved in the EVM, Ethereum Virtual Machine. Specifically, EIP 5656 introduces a new EVM instruction known as mcopy. The purpose of mcopy is to improve the performance of memory copying and assist in a more efficient means of building data structures. This EIP is strictly an efficiency improvement to the EVM and does not have any trade-offs or incompatibilities, as there is no current functional references to mcopy. Broadly speaking, memory copying refers to the process of moving blocks of data from one location in memory to another, basically being able to remember something that happened in the past. It is a fundamental operation in computing used for tasks like building data structures and copying objects. The mcopy instruction can be used for non-overlapping areas of memory, and can be used to move memory backwards. Workflow for copying memory in the Ethereum Virtual Machine proposed by EIP 5656 copies EVM memory and mcopy. So as we can have, there we go. Let's see. As you can see, the source index size copy to the destination index. Move back, move forward, and we can see how that goes. So for context on efficiency gains, copying 256 bytes of memory will cost 27 gas using mcopy under EIP 5656, compared to at least 96 gas using the most common previous method, which required multiple instructions. Currently, if a developer needs to copy memory, their best option is to reference both mstore and mload. The introduction of mcopy is essentially a combination of these two opcodes. Mcopy fills a missing gap in current approaches to copying memory in the Ethereum Virtual Machine. So basically, being able to, before it was a two-step process, as you can see with the mstore. So you store the data, and then mload, you point to the object that you want to load and then load, or that you stored and then you load. So if you're pointing to the wrong thing, you could have an issue there. Compiler issue. And so, code copy, code memory, mload, stack. All right, perfect. Going forward, is rational to expect most developers will utilize mcopy in place of mstore, mload. However, it is notable that no developer will be forced to use mcopy, just as no existing reference to mstore or mload will be affected. It is also worth noting that a more gas-efficient contract ultimately benefits the end user, as they are the ones calling the contract and spending the gas to do so. Charting the future of Ethereum, one EIP at a time. As mentioned in the introduction, the EIPs discussed in this post are largely housekeeping updates that won't change the overall direction of Ethereum. Rather, they are best described as disempowering of one opcode and the introduction of another. In both cases, it's highly likely that Ethereum developers will now be better equipped in their development of smart contracts. Let's see. Let's go. That is the Cancun, the Dencun upgrade of 7044 and 7045. This is for the staking and validator focus upgrades. When we explode the opcode focus 5656 and 6780, we now turn our attention to two staking and validator focused upgrades, EIP 7044 and EIP 7045. While part one focused on minor code changes and technical improvements to Ethereum's execution layer, part two of the series explores changes to Ethereum's consensus layer scheduled for activation in the Cancun Denab fork. These changes are fairly described as improvements to validator operations with hindsight in the months following the merge, though they won't necessarily change Ethereum's overall trajectory. They will allow for more secure implementations of Ethereum staking, as well as increase the security and robustness of the consensus process. EIP 7044, perpetually valid signed voluntary exits, will allow 7044 will allow signed voluntary exits to remain valid indefinitely instead of being valid only for two upgrades or the current and previous consensus layer fork versions, as is the case now. This change aims to simplify and improve the staking user experience, particularly of users of delegated staking solutions. Delegated ETH staking in a nutshell. Generally, delegated staking arrangements involve two parties, the ETH staker, who owns 32 ETH or some multiple of 32 ETH that they'd like to stake, and the validator operator, who manages the technical and operational complexities of running an Ethereum validator on behalf of the ETH staker. The infographic below describes the relationship between an ETH staker and validator operator on Ethereum. ETH staker validator, 100% of staking rewards less validator operator fees. Withdrawal keys and signing keys, validator operator controlled. While some delegated staking arrangements involve the validator operator taking custody of the user's 32 ETH, requiring the user to trust the validator operator not to misuse or steal their funds, it's also possible to offer delegated staking non-custodial. For example, consensus staking offers users their services as a validator operator in an entirely non-custodial manner so that users retain ownership of their funds throughout the entire ETH staking process. Non-custodial delegated staking offering like consensus staking are possible because every Ethereum validator has two types of keys, the signing keys and the withdrawal keys. The validator's signing key is what's used to perform the on-chain duties expected of every Ethereum validator, attesting and proposing blocks. Since validators must sign an on-chain attestation every few minutes, a validator's signing keys are held in a hot wallet for convenient access and must be controlled by the validator operator. The validator's withdrawal key dictates where the original 32 ETH deposit and all accrued staking rewards are sent when a validator exits the beacon chain. Since withdrawal keys tend to be used to perform on-chain actions very infrequently, the validator's withdrawal keys can be held in cold offline storage exclusively by the ETH staker. This ensures that ETH stakers retain sole ownership of their validator's withdrawal key and ultimately their staked funds, even after delegating ownership of their validator signing key to the validator operator. Validator exits in a delegated staking setup. In the delegated staking setup outlined above, a complication arises when the ETH staker decides they would like to exit their validator and withdraw their original 32 ETH deposit and accrued staking rewards. For context, exiting an Ethereum validator requires that a so-called voluntary exit message, VEM, or voluntary exit operation is signed with the validator's signing keys and submitted for processing on the beacon chain by a consensus layer client. Tiku is mentioned as an example. The infographic below provides a more detailed breakdown of the validator exit. Let's open image in new tab. Boop, there we go. So just so you guys can see what this looks like. An Ethereum validator, the client, and a validator client, the voluntary ending message. In signing keys, they submit to the VEMs, process VEMs every block 12 seconds times 16 blocks. There's a 5 epoch delay, the Ethereum validator, and the client. Signing key after the validator signed VEM is processed. It is assigned an exit epoch. Then it's queued for exit. After the validator is processed through the exit queue, it ceases participation in Ethereum's consensus. Hope you like that. That's a good pick. Recall that even in non-custodial delegated staking arrangement, the validator's signing key is held by the validator operator rather than the ETH staker. This arrangement puts the ETH staker in the undesirable position of having to trust their validator operator to sign and submit a voluntary exit on their behalf whenever they wish to exit their validator. So not necessarily permissionless. Some projects make it as well as they can automatic, but like they said, I'd go with Joe Schmo's validator and I signal that I would like to exit and I want my 32 ETH or whatever amount plus my staking rewards back. I have to wait for them to sign that message to exit. If they choose not to, because like they want to get more fees or they're having some issue, I can't do anything. It's my ETH. My ETH can only come to me because I have my withdraw keys, but I can't sign the message to withdraw, to exit and wait to be queued to exit. While it is expected that any reputable validator operator would respect the ETH staker's request to exit, this scenario exposes the ETH staker to the risk that the validator operator refuses to exit their validator, sometimes referred to as griefing. Fortunately, there is a workaround for this suboptimal staking user experience: pre-signed voluntary exits. At present, validator operators demonstrate their intent to honor exit requests from ETH stakers by pre-signing voluntary exits for the validators they operate and sending these pre-signed voluntary exits to the ETH staker who funded each validator. Providing the ETH staker with a pre-signed voluntary exits empowers them to unilaterally submit the voluntary exit to an Ethereum consensus client at any time. By doing so, independently exit their validators. So sort of like a multi-sig, where it is a two-person operation. Let's say it's two signers, 2 of 2. They're pre-signing your approval to exit, and then you only, as the second caller, sign when you truly do want to exit. So it's a cool operational piece there. Today, with these pre-signed validator exits are valid only for the current and previous consensus layer fork versions. In other words, once the Denob fork occurs, voluntary exits that were pre-signed prior to the Capella fork will no longer be valid. This design choice to limit the validity of pre-signed voluntary exits was originally made due to consideration from core devs around the case of a very long contentious fork. In this case, a pre-signed voluntary exit submitted on fork version A would be replayable on fork version B. This will remain a risk once pre-signed voluntary exits are made perpetually valid via the Denob upgrade. However, the consensus amongst core devs is that the advantages and improved staking UX that this change enables outweighs this risk. The EIP's author contends that this possibility is not sufficient to justify the UX degradation exposed above, as no funds are at risk and the staker can restake on one or both of the chains. Future benefits of perpetually valid signed voluntary exits. To reiterate, EIP 7044 will make voluntary exits perpetually valid rather than being valid only for the current and previous consensus layer forked versions. So this sort of is bringing it to the stake and forget type of thing, whereas in 2 upgrades ago, if you had signed and you hadn't gone and your validator hadn't sent you a new pre-sign, you could technically be SOL. If they were a, what's the word? Not a good actor. Beyond improving the staking user experience in the ways described above, the CIP opens up a new design space around automated validator exits. For example, a perpetually valid pre-signed voluntary exit could be stored in some contract or automated mechanism that submits the voluntary exit to Ethereum's consensus layer if and when a specific condition is met. Your validator is inactive for a set number of epochs. This would provide stakers additional protection against inactivity penalties in the event that their validator setup is lost or otherwise goes offline. For those who are more technically savvy, this change will be implemented by making a single change to the state transition function. Modify process voluntary exit to compute the signing, domain, and root fixed on Capella fork version. Additionally, the voluntary exit to make the change backward. Additionally, voluntary exit gossip conditions are implicitly modified to support this change. To make the change backwards compatible, the signature domain is locked on the Capella fork. Increase max attestation inclusion slots. From one perspective, the Ethereum blockchain is primarily made up of blocks, represented below as squares, and attestations represented below as circles. Each attestation can be thought of as a vote on a given block to signal its correctness. Attestations for a specific slot must be included in a block within a predefined time window to be considered valid by Ethereum's consensus mechanism. For the uninitiated, time in Ethereum is divided into epochs, with each epoch containing 32 slots. A slot is a period of 12 seconds in which blocks can be proposed and validated. Epoch 7045 will extend the maximum inclusion slot for attestations from one rolling epoch to two non-rolling epochs. In other words, a validator used to have 32 slots to broadcast their attestation for inclusion on a given slot. Under this upgrade, validators will now be able to attest to the slot in the current epoch plus the complete subsequent epoch, meaning validators now have up to, but not necessarily, 64 slots to include attestations and receive rewards for doing so. The nuance here being that a validator is unlikely to have the complete first epoch to attest in unless the slot they're attesting to is in the first slot of that epoch. This X+1 attestation window was considered during the Beacon chain's initial launch, but has only received more priority now because it will allow faster confirmations times for each block. In order to understand this change better, we must first clarify a key concept in Ethereum's consensus known as fork choice. This is fun stuff. I like going into this stuff. But they put together a really good piece. And so I'm actually going to drop these links so you guys can follow along. Fork choice, how Ethereum determines the canonical block, parent block. While the blockchain is linear, it only becomes so after the network votes on correctness to establish consensus on which block is canonical, and therefore the head block. Before consensus is reached on the canonical block, there may be multiple competing blocks, each receiving some number of attestations or votes, meaning this block is solidified. Now everyone's competing for the next block. And some people might, you have this block here represented as this pink piece. You might have 3 validators that determine this is the next block, or one validator determine that this is the next block, and 2 other validators attest to it in that first slot. But this one comes and says, and it has 50 validators that attest to it. This then becomes the next block. And it then a merge piece or pairing will happen depending, something may be validated or invalidated. Here in the above, we can show what this looks like as block consensus, attestations of blocks at the same row. This block is right in the same as this block, and then it follows the flow. This block does not have a follow through, and so and validators will attest to one of the 3 head blocks as shown by the green, purple, and blue arrows. Until this voting process has completed, the validators attesting to a specific one, the Ethereum network has not decided which block is conical. Evaluating Ethereum's fork choice with LMD Ghost. Ethereum uses an algorithm called LMD Ghost. Latest message driven, greedy, heaviest obscured subtree. This is where Bitcoin's proof of work was a little different. As we had this block, once this was finalized, everyone was competing for the next block. We might have 2 blocks that appear roughly at the same time, but then whichever chain has the next block followed through on it has the most work on it, so that is the true chain. So this is just sort of then dead or dropped blocks. So latest message driven, greedy, heaviest obscured subtree, also known as LMD Ghost. To analyze fork weights and choose a canonical block. LMD Ghost selects the fork with the greatest cumulative weight by recursively traversing block descendants, allowing it to identify the fork most supported by validator attestations. So literally, which fork does it have? If you're thinking of it, everyone sort of thinks of a fork going up piece, but it might be easier for you to imagine it going down. We draw it going sideways usually. I just made it going up, but think of it going down. Which chain is the heaviest, has the most work and votes towards it. Sort of knocks the other pieces out of play. Its primary objective is to prevent the network from disputing which block is canonical or the most attested block. Greediest, heaviest observed subtree. Select the fork with the most weight. So as you can see, you have A or you have B. So A has 1 block, is the next block, and it has 2 forks, and then 2 has 3, 4, 5. So A is confirmed by 1 through 5, giving it a weight of 5. B is confirmed by 6 through 8, giving it a weight of 3. So it's 3 blocks. Ghost will select A. For LMD Ghost to function securely, it needs access to as many attestations as possible. Currently, attestations can only be included within 32 slots of creation. This has limited the attestation dataset available to evaluate the fork choice. Hence, researchers have deemed it appropriate to increase the attestation window of the beacon chain, and therefore increase the number of attestations that may be assigned to a given block. By doing so, LMD Ghost will be able to move more quickly and more efficiently determine the canonical block, enabling consensus nodes to more easily resolve conflicts if 2 or more competing forks appear. It is important to note, however, that LMD Ghost is but one part, albeit an important one, of the mechanism used to secure Ethereum's proof-of-stake consensus. While LMD Ghost is responsible for confirming the canonical block, another algorithm known as Casper, the friendly finality gadget, Casper FFG, determines finality of the epoch. Ethereum POS currently uses a combination of both algorithms, Casper, to manage validator rewards and penalties, determine block validity, elect a canonical block, and declare finality. To learn more about Casper, we encourage reading the Ethereum Foundation's exploratory resource on the Casper algorithm. Note, different applications may choose either LMD Ghost or Casper FFG as a source of truth for Ethereum state, depending on their security needs. The main trade-off here is speed versus fidelity. LMD Ghost can reasonably declare Ethereum's canonical state early, while Casper FFG will take longer to finalize epochs. But once an epoch is finalized, blocks added to the chain during the epoch are immutable. Casper FFG is said to provide accountable safety for this reason. Benefits of increasing the attestation window. By expanding the inclusion window to X+1 epochs instead of restricting inclusion of attestations to the current epoch, enables LMD Ghost to incorporate more attestations when assessing fork weights. This way, LMD Ghost will be able to more confidently select the canonical fork endorsed by the majority of Ethereum validators. The extended window also provides flexibility for validators to influence Ethereum's consensus. For instance, even if some validators are initially censored, their late attestations can still accumulate weight behind the valid fork. This makes LMD Ghost more robust against temporary censorship or coordination issues. EIP 7044 is certainly a step in the right direction towards lowering block confirmation times and reducing latency for Ethereum users. However, we must note that this EIP and corresponding research is independent of ongoing research and development to enable single-shot finality on Ethereum, which will require more significant changes to the consensus layer. The EIPs discussed in this post. There we go. Part 3 of the Ethereum Evolve series focuses, when was this done? November. And restaking arrangements, 4788. Part 1, detailed the consequences of staking validator focused EIP 7044 and 7045. We will now turn over attention to EIP 4788, an arguably more impactful EIP that will lower the trust assumptions inherent to mainnet applications that require information about Ethereum's consensus state to function correctly, such as liquid staking protocols and restaking applications. This is achieved by exposing the parent previous beacon block root in each execution block and storing a small history of these beacon block roots in a new smart contract on Ethereum's execution layer. This beacon block root containing contract will allow any mainnet deployed smart contract to query and gain information about Ethereum's consensus state in a trust minimized manner. A ring buffer is used to ensure that only a limited number of consensus state roots are stored to avoid the contract's state growing indefinitely. Where the first two parts of this series detailed minor technical changes and attunements, 4788 has the potential to more meaningfully impact Ethereum, the upper user application level. As its name suggests, Ethereum's merge represented the joining of two previously distinct blockchains. Pre-merge Ethereum mainnet, now called Ethereum's execution layer, and the beacon chain, now Ethereum's consensus layer. Technically, post-merge Ethereum is two tightly coupled blockchains. However, the block trees of the execution layer, EL, and the consensus layer, CL, have a 1-1 mapping, meaning that every EL block has one new and only one CL block which corresponds to it, and vice versa. This 1-1 mapping of EL and CL blocks means that we can think of post-merge Ethereum as a single blockchain consisting of two layers. The EL is where Ethereum transactions are processed and broadcasted to the rest of the network, and is the layer where all user accounts and smart contracts exist. The contract layer uses Ethereum's proof of stake consensus algorithm and handles transaction settlement and finality by ensuring that a supermajority of validators agree upon the head of the Ethereum blockchain. Now remember, the head is the conical block proposed by 7058. Is that 7058? 7045. I apologize. Historically and to this day, the ways in which Ethereum's layers communicate have been limited. Pre-merge flows. The first information to flow between Ethereum's EL and CL were new. 32 ETH deposits made to Ethereum's deposit contract. The deposit contract is the Ethereum protocol entry point for staking. Technically, it is a standard smart contract deployed on Ethereum mainnet, where anyone can permissionlessly send 32 ETH along with a payload of other data to fund and activate Ethereum validator software. Part of the payload of other data included in each deposit transaction is the deposit data root, which provides a succinct cryptographic representation of all other data included in the deposit transaction. The deposit contract verifies both the amount of ETH and the deposit data root of each deposit transaction, and once it completes this verification, emits a receipt or EVM log event containing the data relevant to that deposit. The fire's starting to go out. I'm getting the smoky side of things now. There are two ways that this deposit log can make its way from Ethereum's execution layer to its consensus layer. The first process we'll refer to as ETH1 data voting. This is the process by which beacon block proposers, validators on Ethereum's beacon chain who are selected to propose beacon blocks, come to agreement on the state of Ethereum's execution layer and in particular the deposit contract. ETH1 data voting is a complicated process requiring a majority vote of beacon block proposers over a repeating cycle of 248 slots, 6.8 hours, and an 8-hour delay. The ETH1 follow distance. The second way a deposit log event is transferred from the EL to the CL is through a validator directly importing these logs from its own execution client via the standard JSON RPC interface. See the deposit processing selection of Ben Eddington's book for more detail. Both of the mechanisms are legacy processes now that merge has occurred and will be reformed in some future Ethereum hard fork, likely under EIP 6110. Post-merge information flows. Since the merge, communication between execution consensus clients have been intermediated by a component called the Engine API. As designed in Ben Eddington's book, the Engine API is one way in the sense that the consensus client can call methods on the Engine API, but the execution client does not call any methods on the consensus client. Ben goes on to explain that after the merge, 3 calls or information flows. The most interesting method the Engine API provides. At a high level, these information flows achieve the following. Flow 1 results in the validation of a newly proposed block. Flow 2 updates the execution client with information about the head of the chain and results in the execution client building an execution payload. And flow 3 results in the consensus client retrieving a newly built execution payload, which includes in the new block proposal. Validator's consensus client, upon receiving a new block proposal, uses the Engine new payload v1 method on the Engine API to send the block's execution payload to its execution client for validation and execution. Regularly, a validator's consensus client uses Engine fork choice updated v1 on the Engine API to update the execution client with the latest head, safe head, and finalized blocks, and to prompt payload building when proposing a new block. When tasked with proposing a block, validator's consensus client uses Engine get payload v1 to retrieve the execution payload built in flow 2, enabling it to propose a new block to the consensus layer. After the Shanghai Capella fork that enabled withdrawals of staked ETH, the methods outlined above in flows 1, 2, and 3 were upgraded to their v2 counterparts, seen here, here, and here, to include the withdrawal information in the calls made by the consensus client to the Engine API. Unlike the Engine API intermediated information flows between Ethereum's execution and consensus layers outlined above. EIP 4788 puts the parent beacon block root from which the state of Ethereum's consensus layer can be derived directly into each execution block. This effectively exposes Ethereum's consensus state in the EVM for the first time and can be thought of as introducing an oracle enshrined at the protocol level, which relays Ethereum's consensus state to the Ethereum mainnet. There are 3 roots in any given consensus block. Note that consensus block and beacon block are interchangeable terms. Beacon block root, this is a hash of the entire header of the previous block. It links each block to its predecessor, forming a chain. We're focused on this root. State root, this is the hash of the root of a Merkle-Patricia tree that represents the state of the Ethereum network after the current block's transactions have been processed. It's not derived from the block header, but from the state of the Ethereum mainnet. Body root, this is the hash of the root of a Merkle-Patricia tree that represents all transactions included on the block. Like the state root, it's not derived from the block header, but from the transactions included in the block. EIP 4788 will force the commitment of a hash tree root of each parent beacon block in the corresponding execution block's header and store each of these roots in a smart contract on Ethereum mainnet. It will do this by introducing a new field in the execution block header, parent beacon block root, which contains the hash tree root of the parent beacon block for the given execution block. The parent beacon block is simply the beacon block that came before the current one. Therefore, EIP 4788 will make use of the beacon block root, but it will be based on the prior block rather than the current block. A limited number of parent beacon block roots will be stored in a smart contract on the Ethereum mainnet. This smart contract will implement a ring buffer data structure so that it can be only ever hold 1 day's worth of consensus state. The purpose of this ring buffer is to ensure that the contract state does not grow indefinitely. As new block roots are added to the buffer, the oldest ones are overwritten once the buffer reaches its capacity, hence maintain a fixed state. This allows for efficient and bounded storage while still providing access to recent consensus layer state. In a sense, this data structure is a trade-off, making the parent beacon block root available for a reasonable amount of time without keeping an overly long and therefore memory-intensive number of hashes. Having this beacon block root containing contract deployed on mainnet will allow any Ethereum contract to pass in an arbitrary execution block height from the last 24 hours and gain information about Ethereum's consensus state at that point in time in a trust minimized manner. Implications of EIP 4788 effectively introduces an oracle enshrined at the protocol level, which relays Ethereum's consensus state to Ethereum mainnet. Once this EIP is merged, smart contracts and protocols deployed on Ethereum mainnet will no longer require a trusted oracle solution to gain information about Ethereum's consensus state. Importantly, this consensus state information can be unpacked and used to determine the status and balance of all Ethereum validators. Currently, many staking related applications rely on Oracle systems composed of a relatively small number of Oracle node providers who are trusted to independently verify and report information about Ethereum's consensus state to the application's contracts on mainnet. These applications include some of the most prominent liquid staking pools, Lido, Rocket Pool. So basically what they're trying to say is right now, only a select few of people are trusted with providing the current state of the consensus layer. Now this consensus layer will be stored on chain at the execution layer for anyone as one smart contract to pull that state from. So it'll be constantly, if Lido goes down or Rocket Pool goes down, that you don't have to rely on them. It's all on chain. The consensus layer is pushing it directly to the execution layer for any applications on the execution layer to see. So it is making it a little bit more permissionless and trustless. I would say more trustless than permissionless, but both in this situation because it is a smart contract that's holding that. And anyone can then call on that. As their name implies, liquid staking pools combine deposits from users into 32 ETH chunks that are used to fund new validators. In exchange for their ETH deposit, users are given a receipt token, an amount proportional to their deposit. These receipt tokens are known as liquid staking tokens, or LSTs, and they provide users with two primary benefits: increased capital efficiency and a simplified UX around tracking their earned staking rewards. LSTs improve the capital efficiency of ETH staking since LST holders can rehypothecate or repurpose their LST as collateral elsewhere in the DeFi ecosystem. Further, they simplify the process of tracking earned staking rewards by periodically updating either the number of LST tokens each user holds, in case of a rebasing LST like Lido staked ETH, or the value of each LST relative to ETH in the case of a repricing token like Rocket Pool's RETH. The way this supplier value increase occurs today is via the staking pool's trusted Oracle system. Lido entrusts 5 Oracle node operators to report the aggregate value of all Lido validators and distribute each day's earnings to users by increasing the number of tokens each user holds. Similarly, Rocket Pool entrusts 18 Oracle node operators to provide the same information for all Rocket Pool validators. However, Oracle node providers are also paid in Rocket Pool's native governance token, RPL. This position is paid one to incentivize honest behavior and alignment with the protocol. Both cases, this Oracle update occurs every 24 hours and introduces the undesirable trust assumptions and a significant centralization vector for the protocol. By exposing the parent beacon block root in the execution layer, EIP 4788 makes Ethereum consensus state available to all contracts and protocols deployed on mainnet in a trust-minimized, cryptographically verified manner, ultimately eliminating the need for trusted Oracle systems. Restaking applications. Practically, when speaking on restaking applications, we're referring to Eigen layer. Conceptually, we're referring to extending the crypto economic security provided by Ethereum's network of validators to services beyond the Ethereum protocol itself. By embedding beacon block roots into the EVM and by using the same logic described in relation to staking pools above, EIP 4788 could enhance the security, trustworthiness, and efficiency of Eigen layer's operations. This upgrade should increase the system's integrity and enable more innovative restaking strategies. Many in the industry consider this an essential upgrade, as restaking solutions could potentially onboard large amounts of staked ETH and expose this ETH to additional slashing criteria imposed by the systems that it's used to secure. By reducing the trust assumptions in restaking, the Ethereum network may limit the potential downsides and chances of restaking slashing event. Next part 4. Is there a part 5? Let me go see. Oh gosh. Oh, they did. All right. So part 4 of the Degen upgrade EIP 7514, which will alter the validator churn limit, and EIP 1153, which will introduce transient storage opcodes in the EVM execution layer. So as a reminder piece here, part 1 of the series explored the opcode focused EIPs of 5656 and 6780, which was the opcode upgrades of mcopy, removing mload and mstore or mstore. This series focused on 2 staking and validator upgrades, 70 and 45, which is the amount of attestations and the bringing to the execution layer what is going on the consensus layer. Part 3 detailed the implications of 4788 and how communication between the consensus and execution layers has evolved. Add max epoch churn limit. 7514 will establish a cap on the per epoch churn limit. 7045. So 4788 was bringing to the execution layer the consensus layer state. 7045 is the what is the right term? Always valid pre-sign, basically, for leaving a staking operation. 7514 will establish a cap on the per epoch churn limit at 8, thereby transitioning the maximum growth rate of Ethereum's validator from exponential to linear. Ethereum's churn limit defines the maximum number of validators that can enter or exit the active set of Ethereum validators every epoch, 6.4 minutes. The churn limit is currently a variable that has a minimum value of 4 and increases by 1 each time a specific number of validators joins the active set. This proposal to cap Ethereum's churn limit at 8 aims to slow down the growth of the validator set and is desirable because having too many active validators can lead to state size bloat, which places additional strain on each node as they strive to keep track of their peers. Implementing EIP 7514 should allow time for research into more comprehensive solutions and for community consensus around them to emerge. Testnet simulations prompted this EIP's inclusion, in which client software struggled to adequately perform past 2 million validators. So when there was more than 2 million validators, the state or memory storage of who's who and who are we listening to, if you have too many voices talking to you at once, one, you can't store all of that data. And then if you're also talking to 2 million people at once, not everyone can hear you, or you might not send your message to someone and might be inactivity and an attestation on that and could vote a slashing for inactivity or downtime. At this time, EIP was decided for mainnet. There were 800,000 active validators. It was, however, the rate of this increase and not the total number of validators that was concerning in the impetus for this EIP's inclusion. The situation appears less dire with the benefits of retrospect. At the time of writing, the validator entry queue has shortened considerably. Still, validator growth is correlated with the overall market, which is want to change on a whim. Entry, not exit. Importantly, this churn limit change will be limited to entry into Ethereum's active validator set and will not be applied to exiting validators. This follows the rationale of 7514 as the primary concern is validator bloat. So as you can see, annual thousands of ETH, each 32 ETH. Changing the churn limit is to some degree a change in Ethereum's monetary policies that alters the growth of total ETH staked and therefore the consensus layer rewards issued per block. By limiting the rate that new validators may enter the beacon chain, we're slowing the rate that new ETH issuance may increase. Of course, this is a secondary effect and not the intended purpose of the EIP. The below chart shows the proposed change in green against various projections. Before the implementation of 7514, the entry churn limit could theoretically, given consistent validator demand of the queue, grow indefinitely. In the limit, this scenario is widely panned as potentially disastrous, with some projecting the complete breakdown of Ethereum's ability to finalize. As we can see, epoch churn limit, limit 16, 12, 8. Churn limits as well. The network health of Ethereum. From the perspective of decentralization and network health, increasing the number of validators on the beacon chain presents a paradox. Ideally, more validators means greater redundancy, a broader range of proposers, a wider array of testers, and overall increased resilience. However, the reality is the more complex, as a higher number of validators can also lead to state size bloat, placing additional strain on each node as they strive to keep track of their peers. As the client software is currently written, Prism, Lighthouse, etc. will struggle to maintain adequate performance past 2 million validators. That means so at 2 million it fails, but leading up to that, it gets harder and harder and more difficult for it to keep up. The acceptance of this EIP by both core developers and the community is implicit upon a more agreeable long-term solution that allows the amount of staked ETH to increase without growing pains. As an example, under EIP 7251, a draft EIP without a guarantee of inclusion, node operators with multiple validators would have the opportunity to consolidate their stake into fewer validators, potentially alleviating the need for a cap on the churn rate. If not, 7251, it's possible that some other form of validator consolidation will be pursued, although this could take many forms. Alternatively, other more creative solutions may be pursued that do not require any form of validator consolidation. In any case, the hope is that the need to govern and throttle new validator entrants will eventually be greatly diminished or removed. The ability to resume a high entrance churn rate will aid in the growth of new staking protocols. A broadly endorsed goal as Ethereum aims to reduce its dependence on large staking pools and further its decentralization. In fact, many Ethereum researchers cites the bias against new staking entrants as a primary negative consideration for EIP 7514. Look for some solutions such as Electra and Prague, the hard forks following Cancun and DNOB, and consider EIP 7514 to be a temporary solution. Transient storage opcodes. Completely unrelated to the validator churn limit, EIP 1153 introduces a concept called transient storage to the EVM, specifically to the execution layer. Transient storage will operate similarly to existing storage opcodes in the EVM, but with a key difference. It will be discarded at the end of each transaction, much like how a computer's RAM is cleared when it's no longer needed. EIP 1153 will introduce two transient storage opcodes, tload and tstore. Together, they will provide a more gas-efficient solution for inter-frame communication during a transaction by discarding the associated values after each transaction. A third type of storage. In Ethereum, a transaction may involve multiple frames of execution. For example, if a transaction calls a smart contract, which in turn calls another smart contract, each of these calls represent a different frame of execution, aka delegated contracts, where contract A calls contract B, which calls contract C. Currently, communication between these frames can only be done through the EVM storage, which is costly in terms of gas. So, like if you're trying to bridge from Solana to Near, you Solana contract call from Solana to EVM to Ethereum, and then Ethereum to Neon, or Solana to Neon to Ethereum, Ethereum to Aurora to Near. Currently, communication between these frames can only be done through the EVM storage, which is costly in terms of gas. EIP 1153, introduction of transient storage, provides a more gas-efficient solution for this inter-frame communication, Data can be temporarily stored and accessed across different frames within a transaction without the need for costly writes to the EVM's permanent storage. Sort of like if you are taking a test and you write something down, or you're writing on a scratch piece of paper versus writing it in your school's workbook. And once you're done writing that note on that scratch pad, you throw that away rather than storing it in your binder. If your binder then gets full of all of the notes you take before you clean them up, type of thing, then you will just have a binder of notes. And you may not understand what you were talking about if you don't clean up your note at a later time when it's needed. Permanent storage, known as contract storage. This is long-term memory where each contract stores its persistent data. Data written here stays indefinitely across transactions and blocks until explicitly overwritten or deleted. It's comparatively expensive in terms of gas costs due to its persistent nature, but necessary for data that must persist as part of the contract's long-term state. Transient storage, proposed in EIP 1153. This can be thought of as medium-term memory. It allows data to persist across different function calls, but within the same transaction. This makes it useful for transactions that involve multiple functions interacting with the same data set. Transient storage will be cleared at the conclusion of each full transaction, just like memory, but unlike memory, it allows for persistence and reference across the different function calls within the same transaction. Memory, or short-term memory, is used to store temporary data during the execution of a single function or operation. The data found in this memory type does not persist from function to function within the same transaction. It is inexpensive to write to, but resets and is cleared after each contract function executes. Make it highly transient and great for temporary calculations or data manipulation within a single call function. The below image created by Pascal Marco Caversio and posted in the Ethereum Magicians Forum further puts this evolving memory and storage landscape into appropriate context. The EVM code, Rob, immutable account storage, persistent, transient storage, stack, machine, available gas, stack, memory, RAM. So, nice little clean piece. We'll be remiss to admit that the equivalent of transient storage is technically feasible within EVM as is, but only in roundabout, expensive, and patchwork ways via writing and explicitly removing storage across frames. EIP 1153 will standardize this hacked process that is, in the best case, inefficient, and in the worst case, known to Ethereum developers. In summary, we see one EIP in 7514 as proactive and precautionary to prevent untenable consensus layer bloat, and the second in 1153 is a significant improvement to the EVM code base that will benefit DApp developers and ultimately end users by way of reducing the gas costs of more complex transactions. Our next and final post in this series will cover proto-dank sharding. This is the fun part, a major milestone, and this is blobs in scaling Ethereum that will greatly improve the efficiency of all layer 2's transactions settling on Ethereum by allowing blobs to ride share alongside blocks. Additionally, check out this course hosted by Education DAO. It's free with donations encouraged to support more content like this. Part 5. In the fifth and final article of the Degen upgrade series, we cover EIP 4844, also known as proto-dank sharding, which will drastically reduce the cost of posting L2 rollup data to Ethereum mainnet via blobs. This is 4844. So far what we've carried, part 1, EIP 5656 and EIP 6780. We then, and those were store, load, and copy, and self-destruct. So getting rid of self-destruct function, adding mcopy, and not disempowering mload and mstore. And then series focused on 2 validator and staking upgrades. The basically infinite sign on pre-signing a withdraw feature, as well as the validator attestations, 4788, between communication between Ethereum's consensus and execution layers. So now the state the consensus level state is now on execution layer and can be read by any contract. EIP 7514 will prevent state log bloat by reducing the amount of validators that can join to 8 per epoch if the outflow is the same. But outflow unstaking is not reduced in any way. And EIP 4844 represents a tangible and important step in Ethereum's journey to scale in a decentralized way. More specifically, it helps scale Ethereum by introducing a new blob-carrying transaction type. Roll-up sequencers and potentially others will use this new transaction type to boast data to Ethereum mainnet more cheaply than is currently possible. Further, this EIP preserves decentralization by ensuring that the size and number of blobs included per block is limited, such that the computational and storage requirements of Ethereum nodes don't drastically increase. So let me read. The EIP preserves decentralization by ensuring that the size and number of blobs included per block is limited. So remember, it's limited to 3 blobs per block at this time, such that the computational and storage requirements of Ethereum nodes don't drastically increase. In future upgrades, these limitations can be reduced to scale Ethereum further. The reason why blob data can be less expensive than regular Ethereum call data is of a similar size is because the blob data itself is not actually made accessible to Ethereum's execution layer. Rather, only reference to the blob's data will be accessible to the execution layer, and the data within the blob itself will be downloaded and stored solely on Ethereum's consensus layer. And only for a limited amount of time, 18 days. Through its blob-carrying transaction format, improves Ethereum's scalability, preserving decentralization, and more importantly, sets the stage for more complex and impactful scalability upgrades to be implemented in the future, namely full dank sharding. This is where we get into the fun stuff. What is a blob? Before giving into how the Ethereum arrived at 4844 or proto-dank sharding is the logical next step to scale Ethereum. We'll first expand the main feature in this EIP introduces, blob-carrying transactions and blobs themselves. In Ethereum today, blocks are filled with standard Ethereum transactions. After the Cancun Denab fork, blocks can be filled with a combination of typical Ethereum transactions and so-called blob-carrying transactions. Blobs can be imagined as sidecars full of data that will ride alongside blocks. The transactions that fill, remember, CL and EL are coming one at one, so they're considered layered, even though they're separate. Transactions that fill Ethereum's blocks don't necessarily have blobs riding with them, but a blob cannot be included in the network without an associated blob-carrying transaction making its way into a block. While exactly how blobs will be used and by whom remains to be seen, it is assumed that the sequencers of Ethereum's L2 rollups will be the primary consumer of blob space and that blobs will primarily contain batch transactions that were executed on these rollups. Moreover, we can think of these blobs as compressed data structures, like a zip file or a CNFT. Blob, KZG blocks, temporary data. Blob carrying transaction contains 2 new fields that a typical Ethereum transaction does not. A bid that defines how much the transaction submitter is willing to pay to have their blob carrying transaction included in a block, max fee per blob gas, and a list of references to the blobs included in the transaction. Blob versioned hashes. Notably, the blob carrying transaction doesn't actually include the blob data, only a reference to it in the blob versioned hashes field. Technically, this reference is a hash of KZG commitment to the blob, but for our purposes, it is sufficient to think of this as a fingerprint that is unique to each blob and that can be used to tie each blob to a blob carrying transaction. Since only this reference to each blob exists within a given block, the L2 transactions contained in each blob are not and cannot be executed by Ethereum's execution layer, aka EVM. This is the reason why blob data is given size. This is the reason why blob data of a given size, 128 kilobits per blob, can be posted to Ethereum by a rollup sequencer more cheaply than regular Ethereum call data of a similar size. Blob data does not need to be re-executed by the layer 1. Ethereum, in this case, the actual data that makes up each blob is circulated and stored exclusively on Ethereum's consensus layer, aka beacon nodes, and only for a limited period of time, 4,096 epochs or 18 days. Technically, blobs are vectors of data that are made up of 4,096 field elements, of which each field element being 32 bytes in size. Blobs are constructed in a way that so we can create this succinct cryptographic references to them that are found in the blob carrying transactions, so that blobs can be represented as polynomials. Representing blobs as a polynomial allows us to apply some clever mathematical tricks, namely erasure coding and data availability sampling, that ultimately reduces the amount of work each Ethereum consensus node must perform to verify the data in a blob. Full explanation of mathematics enables all of this is out of scope for this post, but Domothy's Block Space 101 article provides an accessible starting point. Making use of the blob. How will rollup sequencers make use of the blob? Ultimately, rollup sequencers need to post some data to Ethereum mainnet. Today, they do this by posting batch transaction data as Ethereum call data, which is an arbitrary data type and can be quite expensive. After EIP 4844 is implemented, rather than submitting their data to mainnet as call data, rollup sequencers can sign and broadcast the new blob-carrying transaction type and achieve the same goal, having their data posted to and therefore secured by Ethereum mainnet. Proto-Dank sharding also introduces two new precompiles, the blob verification precompile and the point evaluation precompile, that are meant to be used by optimistic and ZK rollups respectively. These precompiles are what's used to verify that data of blob matches the reference to the blob included in the blob carrying transaction, i.e. the versioned hash of the KZG commitment to the blob. More specifically outlined how each rollup will use these precompiles will quote EIP 4844 itself. Optimistic rollups only need to actually provide the underlying data when fraud proofs are being submitted. The fraud proof submission function will require the full contents of the fraudulent blob to be submitted as part of the call data. It would use the blob verification function to verify the data against the versioned hash that was submitted before, and then perform the fraud proof verification on that data as is done today. ZK rollups would provide two commitments to their transaction or state delta data, the KZG in the blob, and some commitment using whatever proof system the ZK rollup uses internally. They would use a commitment proof of equivalence protocol using the point of evaluation precompile to prove that KZG, which the protocol ensures points to available data, and the ZK rollup's own commitment refer to the same data. Blob market. While the number of blobs that may be attached to a block is dynamic, ranging from 0 to 6, 3 blobs will be targeted per block. See? Like I said, 3 blobs. The targeting is conducted via pricing incentive mechanism not dissimilar to 11.1559. The pricing of a blob gets more expensive when there are more than 3 blobs attached to a block. Reciprocally, the blob price gets cheaper when there are less than 3 blob sets to be attached to a given block. Specifically, the cost for blob transactions from one block to the next can increase or decrease by up to 12.5%. The degree to which these price movements approach per block is calculated by the total amount of gas used by all attached blobs, which necessarily scales within the increase of blobs, since all blobs will be 128 kilobytes in size regardless if they are completely filled or not. This pricing calculation functions via running gas tally. If blocks consistently host more than 3 blobs, the price will continually increase. As the blob market fluctuates via the dynamic pricing model described above, Layer 2 contracts will need near real-time pricing information of the blob market to ensure proper accounting. Alongside EIP 4844, the corresponding EIP 7516 will ship to create opcode blob BA safe, CEFI, blob base fee, blob base fee, which rollups in layer 2s will utilize to query the current blob base fee from the block header. It is an inexpensive query requiring only 2 gas. Blob is transient and designed to remain available for exactly 18 days. After this, roughly 18 days, the specific data within the blob will no longer be retrievable from the majority of consensus clients. However, the evidence of its prior existence will remain on mainnet in the form of a KZG commitment. I'll explain these later. You can think of this as a leftover fingerprint or fossil. These cryptographic proofs can be read to prove this specific blob data once existed and was included on Ethereum mainnet. Why was 18 days chosen? It's a compromise between cost of increased state size and liveliness, but the decision was also made with optimistic rollups in mind, which have a 7-day fault-proof window. This fault-proof window was therefore the minimum amount of time blobs must remain accessible, but ultimately more time was allotted. Power of 2 was chosen 2 to 12 for simplicity. Even though the protocol will not mandate blob storage beyond 18 days, it is highly likely that certain node operators and service providers will achieve this data. That is to say, a robust blob archive market is likely to merge off-chain, despite the protocol not mandating permanent inclusion on-chain. Each blob is attached to a block or may hold 128 kilobytes of temporary data, although a given layer 2 may not completely fill a given blob. Importantly, even if a layer 2 does completely fill a blob, the size of the blob being attached to the block will always be 128 kilobytes. The unused space must still be accounted for. Therefore, given the range of potential blobs per block, EIP 4844 may increase the data associated with a block by up to 768 kilobytes. 128 kilobytes per blob, 6 possible blobs. Immediately after EIP 4844, layer 2s will not collectively fill blobs. In fact, data that a layer 2 batches into a blob space will not have a relationship with the data at different layer 2 batches. It's worth noting that protocol upgrades or future innovations such as shared sequencers or blob sharing protocols may allow L2s to collectively fill a given blob. This is, of course, currently the case with block space, where protocols, rollups, DApps, and user transactions are collectively bundled together as appropriate by size and priority fee. Where the collectivization from a public mempool typically catered to consistently full or near full blocks, it may be the case that rollups will look less likely bump up against the 128 blob space limit before a form of blob sharing is introduced. Not only will there be a single sequencer or organizer per blob, but the relatively cheap nature of blob space may enable less cramming and efficiency maxing compared to block space in the immediate term. In that way, blob space efficiently may not be immediately close to the maximum until the rollup market and rollups themselves further mature. Neither will layer 2s be forced to use blob space, and some may opt to occasionally continue to use block space or even other data availability platforms. One can imagine many creative posting solutions dependent on the need for data retrieval and the market prices across each storage type. Seen by all nodes, you can see store execution client block space. Blob space is on consensus layer. EVM access, yes. No for the blob space. Forever for longevity. 18 days. Cost, expensive. Cheap for blob space. In any case, a block with 6 full blobs attached does not represent an consequential increase in a block size. If a block today can be as large as 1.875 megabytes, and a full set of blobs can be as much as 0.75 megabytes, we should note the possibility of increasing the block size by as much as 40%. However, we must proportionately note that this increase in block size only occurs on a rolling 18-day basis on the head of the chain. Therefore, a node on a network will not need to meaningfully increase its long-term storage capacity. 18 days represents a small fraction of Ethereum's state history. The following calculation can be used to anticipate the targeted increase in storage space required per node. Target 3 blobs at 128 kilobytes each will equal 384 kilobytes per block. 32 blocks per epoch will times 496 epochs for blob expiry, 131,072 blocks with blobs. 348 kilobytes times 131,000 blocks, 48 gig increase in storage. KZ commitments in the KZG ceremony. We previously compared blobs to sidecars attached to blocks or the main car. Furthering this analogy, it's appropriate to consider the hash of a KZG commitment as the rod that attaches the two cars. Each blob requires its own KZG commitment to ride along with the block. During the consensus protocol of EIP 4844, validators will need to download entire blobs to check that they are available and to verify that the KZG commitment is correct. After full dank sharding is implemented, they will only need to see a fraction of a blob to make the same verification. However, in the event that a blob data needs to be submitted to the EVM, both proto-dank sharding and under dank sharding, the KZG commitment itself can be used to prove that individual elements of the data are correct without having to provide the entire 128 kilobytes of blob. As a prerequisite for generating the KZG commitments associated with each blob, the community conducted a KZG trusted setup ceremony to create the necessary cryptographic parameters without which none of the future KZG commitments would be possible. This ceremony was open to all, and its chief purpose was to create randomness with an internal correlation that nobody could predict or recreate. In fact, not only was the ceremony open to all, but any who opted to join the ceremony generated a portion of the necessary preconditions, which, only when utilized together to allow for the creation of the KZG commitments, needed to attach blobs to blocks. In order to reveal the secrets behind these cryptographic parameters and therefore break the KZG commitment scheme, every single participant would need to collude, connect their individual pieces of information to reconstruct the whole. As a consequence, only one person needed to honestly discard their portion of the computation to make it impossible to recreate. Therefore, any individual person that contributed to the ceremony could consider the setup trustless, as they would only need to trust themselves. Over time, consensus on the optimal implementation of sharding has gradually shifted towards more pragmatic roll-up-centric approach. EIP 4844 represents a compromise between the ideal end goal and a realistic near-term implementation, while still leaving a technical runway for the ideal end state to be achieved. Full sharding. The concept of sharding was originally proposed as a horizontal scaling solution for Ethereum and has been discussed and refined within the Ethereum community since its inception of the chain. In its original form, implementing full sharding, aka execution sharding, would have meant splitting the Ethereum blockchain into multiple shards or mini blockchains that run in parallel to the beacon chain. Each of these shards would operate similarly to the post-merge Ethereum blockchain, with distinct blocks and block proposers per shard, and each shard being secured by a randomly assigned, consistently changing subset of Ethereum active validator set. These validator subsets would be tasked with executing and validating transactions, attesting to blocks and proposing blocks within their assigned shard. The beacon chain would act as an orchestrator of this shard system, randomly assigning validators to shards. Crucially, full sharding would have seen both Ethereum's execution layer and consensus layer be sharded to achieve the network scalability goals. This was and still is a viable path for the Ethereum blockchain to achieve decentralized scaling. In practice, however, implementing full sharding requires answering a number of still unanswered research questions about communication between shards, the economic security of shards, and so on. The complexity and unknowns around implementing full sharding created an opportunity for alternative scaling solutions, those that could be implemented more quickly, to arise. Those familiar with the Ethereum ecosystem are all likely aware that since 2020, Layer 2 solutions, including rollups, have emerged as a predominant scaling solution for Ethereum. Rollups, whether optimistic or ZK rollups, are separate blockchains that run on top of Ethereum mainnet, aka Layer 1 or Layer L1. L1 blockchain rollups have their own internal state and are appealing to users and developers since they can be transacted upon much more cheaply than on Ethereum mainnet. This is because in rollups, user transactions are batched and only periodically posted in a single transaction to a smart contract on Ethereum mainnet by each rollup's so-called sequencer. Outsourcing the transaction execution of these optimistic and ZK rollups effectively removes the need for Ethereum nodes to do this computationally expensive work of execution themselves, but still allows Ethereum nodes to secure and validate L2 transactions by way of enforcing constraints on the data that each rollup sequencer can post. In the case of optimistic rollups, all data posted by the sequencer is assumed to be correct. However, a delay is enforced before some data, like the bridging releasing of funds from L2 to L1, can be acted upon. During this delay, anyone can, at least in theory, submit a fault proof to demonstrate the sequencer posted malicious or incorrect data. It's worth noting that in practice, today's dominant optimistic rollups either do not have this fault proof mechanism enabled or only allow whitelisted entities to submit fault proofs. In the case of ZK rollups, the only data that the L1 contract will accept from the sequencer is that which comes with a cryptographically valid proof, which provides a mathematical guarantee of the data's correctness. When a thriving ecosystem rollups, demand for transaction execution can increasingly be met by L2 solutions. In this way, the existence of rollups made sharding Ethereum's execution layer less necessary. However, validating these two L2 transactions still require having on-demand access to the data necessary for verification. Excuse me. Scaling execution and data availability to the comparatively simpler task of sharding Ethereum's concentrated liquidity. As we saw above, the introduction of L2 rollups meant that Ethereum could outsource execution to these out-of-protocol scaling solutions and abandon full sharding. Dank sharding, named after Ethereum's researcher Dan Feist, represents an even further simplification that eliminates the need to shard Ethereum's consensus layer. Rather than splitting Ethereum's validating nodes into shards that independently process and validate all Ethereum and L2 data, Dank sharding proposes a new transaction type that contains reference to large additional blobs of data. Note, these are the same blob-carrying transactions we'll get in EIP 4844. By constructing these blobs in a clever way so that they can be represented as polynomials, Ethereum's validating nodes can make use of what's known as polynomial commitment scheme data availability sampling, without having to download and verify the entire blob. Ultimately, this allows the Ethereum protocol to push blocks with references to large amounts of blob data while keeping validating nodes small so that decentralization can be preserved. Notably, keeping Ethereum's validating nodes small in this way requires proposer-builder separation, wherein a block builder processes and executes all block and blob data. The validator tasked with proposing a new block simply selects and proposes the block header submitted with the highest bid, and all other validators simply verify the block data via data availability sampling. Since Ethereum validators won't include blocks on mainnet unless they can verify that the block's data is available, this makes it virtually impossible for a roll-up sequencer to post their data to mainnet while withholding the same or all of that data. As mentioned, Dank sharding eliminates the need to segregate Ethereum validators into subgroups tasked with validating separate shards of the Ethereum blockchain. In fact, Dank sharding is somewhat of a misnomer. It's perhaps better called Dank sampling, since sharding is not technically happening as it was originally designed. Instead of validation being done horizontally by multiple groups of Ethereum validating nodes, a portion of blob validation will instead be probabilistically assigned to a single node grouping. Block validation will remain unchanged. We're not implementing Dank sharding in the Cancun Denab upgrade. Is often referred to as proto-Dank sharding, named after Ethereum researcher Proto Lambda and Dan Feist. It serves as a preliminary version of Dank sharding and will establish most of the cryptographic foundations necessary for Dank sharding's full implementation. Oh my gosh. Dank sharding, in the same way, proto-Dank sharding targets the 3 blobs, but allows for a maximum of 6. Dank sharding aspires to target 8 blobs with a maximum of 16. In addition to increasing the number of blobs that may be attached to a block, Dank sharding will also increase the size of each of these blobs, in a process referred to as erasure coding. Each node will not have to verify an entire blob, only a portion of it. If data availability sampling reduces the number of blobs a given node must verify, ensure coding reduces the amount of a blob a node must verify. Still, there are other more nuanced technical problems that must be addressed. One of them being the creation of a more resilient network topology. We've gone over a lot on this. We are going to post all of this later tonight or tomorrow as we get ready for this. As we broke down the different EIPs of what is in the Cancun upgrade and what is next on the Electra side, consensus layer side, CL. So it's not going to be a mandatory thing, but L2s are most likely going to want to make cheaper fees, and then it's passed on. So some cool stuff is really coming out of this proto-Dank sharding upgrade, or also known as Cancun, and a lot of it both helping with the Ethereum to scale and helping with state log bloat. So some really cool stuff is coming out within this upgrade tomorrow, and we'll get these links out to you so you can read these on your own time. Sometimes I read too fast. But with that, I want to thank everyone from LinkedIn, Player One Taco YouTube, Xerox Degens YouTube, Matic, Twitter video, Rumble, Kick, and Unlonely. Remember, I know the outlines of all of these, but being able to go through it with you was reading off a page, but from a trusted source. And what Herding Cats is one of the main spots that I go to, and all of these talks are there as well about Cancun. So there's a lot of optimism about these rollups happening and how they will happen with their sequencers, putting more transactions into blob data being cheaper to put on than all of those other transactions. So this is going to be something that could be really good. But like I said, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It has been a long night of technical talk. And please, in the comments, let me know if you have any questions about this. And hope to have someone amazing on this week to actually talk more about this from the developer standpoint, what it means for everyone. And so I hope that you'll find some value in that. But like I said, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. And we're going to end this episode as we end every episode with our words of wisdom, as well as the best, worst knock-knock joke on the face of the planet. And that is a closed mouth cannot be fed, and you cannot feed a closed mouth, meaning if no one knows you're looking for opportunity can never come a knocking. If opportunity does come knocking and no one answers, it's going to keep on walking. With that, I want to thank you all and hope that you all have a great night. And we end with the greatest, worst knock-knock joke on the face of the planet. And that is, knock, knock. Who's there?